Good morning again, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming back and keeping the room full after the great opening session. I have the honor and privilege to introduce the high-level ministerial session on enabling agency. And I'm Dr. Andrea Milan, working with the Global Center for Climate Mobility, and I'm going to be moderating this session today. So without further ado, because we are a little bit late on the agenda, I would like to invite the distinguished group of ministers on stage, starting with His Excellency Wayne Gemu, the Minister for Environment, Climate Change, Disaster Management, and Meteorology of the Solomon Islands. I don't see a minister. Thank you, Minister. We then have His Excellency William Abraham Stephanus Ocamp, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment of the Republic of South Africa. Welcome, Minister. Thanks for joining us. I have the honor to also invite His Excellency Martin Moretti, Minister of Justice of the Republic of Kiribati, to join us today on stage. Thank you, Minister, for joining us. His Excellency Diaz Faisal Malik Hendropriyono, Vice Minister of Environment of Indonesia. Oh. Yes. Thank you, Vice Minister. And we have His Excellency Noelia Soke, Ambassador for Cross-Border Cooperation of the Principality of Andorra. Welcome, Ambassador. And we have His Excellency Mohamed Shatur Badawi, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Head of Mission in Brussels of the Union of the Comoros. Thank you, Ambassador, for being with us today. And unfortunately, Executive Director Cheik Diong, due to a flight delay, is not able to join us on the panel, but he will be joining us later today, so you will have the opportunity to interact with him. Before we start hearing from our distinguished panelists, I would like to ask you for a couple of minutes of your attention to the video Rodin's Story, which was filmed in Barranquilla, Colombia, as part of our Greater Caribbean Climate Mobility Initiative. So the screen will, the movie start.
Bueno, mi nombre es Rodin Eliezer López Moreno, tengo 29 años, vivo con mi esposa, mis dos hijos, soy técnico en electrónica, me rebusco en lo que salga. Y a veces ni duermo. Hemos estado 2 días sin dormir, 3 días. La mosquitera, la hediondeza que pega de las pozas, culebras, mosquitos, arañas, gusanos, que no sale aquí, zorrochucho. Todo de noche que no duermo pensando, estresado. Y no, esto no es vida para nadie, ni para mí ni para mis hijos, ni para mi esposa. Es algo que es pésimo. Entre culebras, sapos, arañas, de todo, se moja por todos lados, se moja el colchón, la ropa, todo se inunda, se rebosan las pozas sépticas. Ya no aguanto más, por eso me voy. Ya aquí no hay vida ni para mí ni para mis hijos. ¿Qué futuro quiero yo? Salir de aquí está un poquito mejor, está más cómodo, o sea, echar mi sueño tranquilo. Saber que el día de mañana pasado va a volver a llover y me voy a volver a inundarme. Por eso es lo que yo quiero, tener una tranquilidad, no haber vivido más nada en la vida.
Chao. Chao, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Noelia Souquet has a flight to catch. So with sincere thanks to the rest of the panel for the understanding for the last-minute change in program, I have the pleasure and the honor to invite Ambassador Souquet, who is an ambassador for cross-border cooperation of the Principality of Andorra, to address you today. Thanks a lot for coming, and the floor is yours, ma'am. Ambassador.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, thank you very much, first of all, to the dear panelists for accepting to move the protocol. I really appreciate. I would like to thank the Global Center for Climate Mobility and the Robert Bosch Foundation for convening this forum and inviting Andorra to convey the voice of mountains. For Andorra, climate change is no longer a distant projection. It is a lived reality that we're facing every day. Earlier this May, temperatures in the Pyrenees reached 35 degrees Celsius instead of the expected 25. This year, we also experienced unprecedented landslides for the first time caused by intense rainfall and snowfall. Our main access route through France, we only have two access routes in Andorra, one via Spain and one via France. The main one through France was closed for several months due to the landslides, disrupting mobility, economic activity, and livelihoods during the peak winter season. You can imagine the economic consequences that the country has suffered since that event. So this is a reminder that climate impacts are already reshaping our lives, communities and economies, including in mountain regions. And we believe that they're often overlooked in global discussions. As a small country in the mountains, Andorra welcomes the efforts to build a global consensus on climate mobility. And allow me to highlight three priorities. Firstly, Andorra believes that we must remain firmly committed to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Reducing emissions remains the first line of defense against future displacements and climate-related risks. Andorra is proud to be among the countries leading by example. We are the first party under the Paris Agreement to complete the full transparency cycle under the ETF, and we're very proud of that. We also among the first countries to have submitted our NDC 3.0, and we continue to champion the transparency under the Paris Agreement. We are on track with our emission pathways. We're also very proud of that one. So my message to you today is very simple. It's not a question of size. And I think that all the countries represented today here have demonstrated that fact. Secondly, action must be grounded, and some of the colleagues said it, in science and data. Just last week, I was in Bonn for the UNFCCC SB64 that conveyed a mandated dialogue on mountains and climate change. It was a key momentum for the mountain agenda and for us. We were able to put forward the scientific proof that mountains are part of the solution and that the communities need the capacities to anticipate the risks and make informed decisions about their own future. Third, finance. Of course, we heard about it many times. The finance flows must reach the local communities that need the most. And I know most of you here in the room are already committed to make that happen. Those in the front line of that climate impact often really face the greatest barriers. And we see that the adaptation gap is growing by the day. So I think we need to mobilize more resources, de-risk investments, make projects bankable and enable local communities to directly access those capital and those funds. So in this context, we support efforts to strengthen localized climate finance and integrate climate mobility consideration into national climate planning. Excellencies, Andorra welcomes the growing recognition of mountains within the global climate agenda. We are really working hard to make the voice of mountains heard around the world. And we believe that these momentum need to grow. Every country, regardless of its size, has a contribution to make, and I think we're a clear example of that. So let's use this forum to build partnerships, as Kamal really said, very to the point, advance in practical solutions and turn political ambition into concrete actions. Together, let's move mountains, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. And I apologize for having to leave because my daughter is graduating to preschool today, so I'm gonna run to see her today and give her a big hug.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and for those of us who have engaged on mountain issues, you've been a powerful voice for mountains, and we're glad to have you here today. So I now have the distinguished honor to introduce to you our next speaker, His Excellency Wayne Gemu, Minister for Environment, Climate Change, Disaster Management and Meteorology of the Solomon Islands. Thank you very much, sir, for your leadership and for coming a long way from the Solomon Islands. Thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, Head of State, Honorable Ministers, Heads of Delegation, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Master of Ceremony, for the introduction. Standing in front of you is the Minister responsible for environment, climate change, disaster management, meteorology, and everything else for our beautiful country, Solomon Islands. It is an honor to join you today at the second Berlin Climate Mobility Forum. I thank the Global Center for Climate Change, Climate Mobility, and the Robert Bosch Steve Tang for convening this important gathering. The Solomon Islands is proud to endorse the global principles for addressing climate mobility. These principles represent a historic step towards a coherent response to one of the defining challenges of our time. They provide a common framework and language for addressing climate change, climate mobility, and ensuring that vulnerable communities are not left to face these crises alone. However, principles must lead to action. We must now advance the climate mobility adaptation agenda as a practical roadmap that translates global commitments into meaningful support for communities on the front line. For the Solomon Islands, climate mobility is not a future possibility. It is already a reality. Across our islands, families are witnessing the sea reclaiming their lives in real time. Burial grounds are being washed away. Wells are turning brackish, and homes built over generations are collapsing into the tide. For us, the climate crisis is not a forecast. It is already reshaping our coastlines and in some places, taking our islands altogether. In recent decades, 5 of our reef islands have disappeared beneath the sea, while 6 others have been severely eroded. On Notambo, in one of our 9 provinces, families have watched 3/4 of their homes destroyed by the waves. In Walande, an entire community of approximately 800 people has relocated from their island home to mainland Malaita. These are not statistics to us. They are our families, neighbors, and communities. Their experiences remind us why climate mobility must be addressed with urgency, dignity, and compassion. They have also taught us a fundamental lesson that protecting people in a warming world means protecting their right to choose, to stay where they can, and to move when they must, and to do either with dignity and agency. Excellencies, allow me to share 3 reflections aligned with the first 3 climate mobility principles. First, we must protect the right to stay. For most Solomon Islanders, the deepest wish is to remain on the land and reefs of their ancestors. Our first priority must therefore be to help communities remain safely in their homes for as long as possible. This requires investment in resilient infrastructure, coastal protection, freshwater security, climate-resilient food systems, and ecosystem restoration, including mangroves that protect our shorelines. It also requires stronger climate information services and early warning systems that enable communities to prepare and respond effectively. Staying in place is not only about physical safety. It is about preserving culture, identity, heritage, and dignity. Second, when people must move, they must be able to move with dignity. We recognize that in some circumstances, mobility will become unavoidable. When relocation is necessary, it must be planned, voluntary, and community-led. Too often, movement occurs as an emergency response, leaving communities vulnerable and disorientated. Relocation should instead strengthen resilience. Families must have access to livelihoods, services, and opportunities while maintaining their cultural identity and social cohesion. The Solomon Islands has sought to lead by example. In 2022, we developed and adopted the National Planned Relocation Guidelines to support communities facing climate change impacts and to ensure that relocation protects livelihoods, culture, and dignity. We have also recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the Global Center for Climate Mobility to undertake a climate mobility deep dive, helping us better understand, anticipate, and plan for future mobility across our islands. We encourage our partners to support the implementation of these efforts to recognize planned rights-based relocation as an essential adaptation measure. Third, we must ensure that no one is excluded. Some of our most vulnerable citizens lack the means to move, even as climate risks intensify around them. The poorest households, older persons, and those without sufficient resources may remain in increasingly hazardous areas, not because they choose to, but because they have no alternatives. For these communities, adaptation finance, social protection, and accessible support are essential. No one should be left behind simply because they lack the resources to relocate or adapt. Enabling agency means ensuring that all people have meaningful choices and the support needed to act on them. Excellencies, beyond the human dimension, sea level rise also threatens our sovereignty and maritime zones. It raises profound questions regarding the continuity of statehood, maritime boundaries, and the right of our people. International cooperation will be essential to provide a legal certainty, protect maritime entitlements, and safeguard the rights of affected communities. For small island developing states such as the Solomon Islands, this is not only about adaptation. It is about protecting our nationhood and our future. Finally, adaptation finance must reach the local level. Communities on the front line are already taking action by building seawalls, restoring ecosystems, and adapting their livelihoods. Yet, their efforts remain constrained by limited resources. They need direct access to finance, climate information, technology, and technical support to scale their initiatives. Empowering local communities is the most effective way to ensure that climate mobility responses are practical, inclusive, and sustainable. The Solomon Islands stands ready to work with partners to advance these principles and translate them into action. Together, let us ensure that climate mobility responses uphold dignity, human rights, cultural identity, and resilience so that our people and generations to come can live with security and pride in the face of a changing climate. I thank you for your attention. Tagyo Tomas.
Thank you very much, Minister, also for your endorsement of the principles, and we look forward to our partnership also with the deep dive. And I now have the honor to invite our third speaker, His Excellency Willem Abraham Stefanus Ocamp, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment of the Republic of South Africa, who also came, of course, it's a long way. Thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, heads of state, former heads of state, ministers, ambassadors, the Robert Bosch Stiftung, ladies and gentlemen, good day. It's a privilege for me to be here today to discuss this very important issue that really touches to the heart of what we experience at the southern tip of Africa very, very often. Climate change is no longer only an environmental challenge, it is increasingly a human challenge. We see that, we feel that, we live that in our country. Across Africa, communities are facing the devastating consequences of floods, prolonged droughts, rising temperatures, and a lot of other extreme weather events. But it's very important that we must realize that despite contributing the least to global emissions, our continent bears a disproportionate burden that is due to climate change. We do the least, but we get the most horrific reactions to that. One of the most profound impacts is the displacement and migration of people within and across borders. We see how climate change in certain parts of Africa have led people to come to our country to seek for economic opportunities. They can't go back because their farmlands have been flooded or have been washed away, or droughts prevent them from making a living elsewhere. It is very important, however, to note that behind every statistic is a family. It's a human being with children and a wife that has to leave their homes. It's a farmer who has lost a livelihood, or a total community struggling to rebuild back faster. Let me give you a practical example. In the recent floods in the KwaZulu-Natal province of our country, more than 26,000 people, homes were lost. 26,000 homes. Just let that sink in. That is directly due to climate change. Climate mobility is therefore not simply about movement, it's about people, it's about dignity, and it is about resilience. And Africa's people is resilient, I can promise you that. My friend from Botswana knows that very well. President Masisi, we are a resilient people. South Africa's response is guided by our Climate Change Act of 2024, our National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, as well as the Climate Change Coastal Adaptation Response Plan. Working closely with municipalities, we are undertaking climate risk and vulnerability assessments, developing response measures, and strengthening local adaptation planning. Several municipalities are also piloting early warning systems to improve preparedness for climate-induced disasters. And I'm glad to say that in partnership with the United Nations, as well as with our South African Weather Services, we are advancing multi-hazard early warning systems for floods, for droughts, for heat waves, with the aim of building resilience at community level. To address climate mobility, we must better understand the drivers of migration and strengthen the resilience of vulnerable communities, particularly in rural areas. This requires closer alignment between adaptation strategies and disaster risk reduction frameworks. We must build back better and faster. As a participant in the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, South Africa believes migration management must be addressed holistically and collectively. Events such as this is so important in finding those solutions that we in Africa desperately need. We support the Common African Position on Migration and the African Union Strategy and Action Plan on Human Mobility, which focuses on addressing the root causes while managing migration in a humane and in a sustainable manner. Excellencies, climate mobility is a shared challenge that demands shared solutions. Through greater cooperation, investment and solidarity, we can protect vulnerable communities and build a more resilient future for us all. Let's stand together and do that for those that need it. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And before moving on to our next panelist, I have the honor, we have an interlude. We have the honor of listening to a youth statement from our two outstanding climate mobility youth fellows, Mark Tilley and Laura Serna Mosquera. Mark, Laura, the floor is yours.
Laura and I will be alternating speaking in English and Spanish, so I encourage all those who need interpretation to take a couple of moments and connect. Okay. Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues, Rosa Luxemburg once warned us that those who do not move do not notice their change. But the reality of climate mobility and other forms of mobility is that too often, those who cannot move feel their change the strongest. And our chains are not built equally. Dear friends and colleagues of ours who should be sitting in this room today were unable to obtain the visas required to join us in Berlin. Immobility is the dark shadow cast by mobility. Their empty seats remind us that mobility is never only about those who move, but also about those who are prevented from moving.
Los principios de movilidad climática responden a la necesidad urgente de adoptar enfoques más coherentes y basados en derechos humanos. Frente a la movilidad climática, reuniendo políticas e instituciones fragmentadas para hacernos un llamado a la acción. Su propósito es servir como una respuesta proactiva, tanto en términos de políticas, programas e instituciones, de leyes y de capacidades nacionales ya existentes, que a menudo, en frente de una crisis climática, ponen a la movilidad climática en el centro.
That is why we support the global principles for addressing climate mobility. They recognize the right to stay, the need for safe and dignified mobility pathways, the protection of people who are displaced, and the urgent need to ensure that no one is trapped in unsafe conditions. It is them that I want us to think about today. Those who cannot move, those who choose not to move, and those who are forced to move.
Una respuesta basada en derechos humanos requiere planificación anticipada, procedimientos transparentes y la salvaguardia para garantizar que los derechos de las personas sean protegidos, sus bienes, su vida, sus medios de vida y sus relaciones sociales. Como fellows y como jóvenes hemos acompañado este proceso y llevamos con nosotros tanto la esperanza como la responsabilidad de convertir estas palabras en acciones. Compartimos la responsabilidad de proteger el derecho de las comunidades de todo el mundo a decidir cómo y dónde quieren vivir, a decidir y asegurar que las decisiones que puedan tomar sean seguras, dignas y con justicia.
For those who are here, and for those who should be here, we urge you to commit to these principles and to turn them into action. And our promise as youth, civil society, researchers, local leaders, and affected communities is this: we will match your courage, and we will support you to deliver this agenda's promise of dignity, agency, and justice. So for the leaders, advocates, lawmakers, and decision makers amongst us today, I leave you with one question. Is our work creating change or helping to remove them? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mark Laura, for your inspiring words. I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Martin Moretti, Minister for Justice of the Republic of Kiribati, to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, MC. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, greeting from Kiribati. It is a great pleasure and a distinct honor to deliver a statement on behalf of our President, His Excellency the President Stanis Mamau, the government and the people of Kiribati on this important second Berlin Climate Mobility Forum. The primary goal of consolidating efforts towards a global consensus on climate mobility, including a specific objective of this year, 2026. Forum resonate the climate change priorities of the blue Pacific continents and Kiribati in particular. As low-lying atoll about 3 meters above sea level. Kiribati span a vast ocean area of 3.5 million square kilometers. And this is one of the countries exposed to climate change and sea level rise-related disasters, including coastal erosion, inundations, shore sanitation, and droughts, which affect our land, our resource, and force people to relocate. But before we concentrate to that, the intermediate interventions essential for governments include building resilience and developing adaptation measures. The political and policy interventions include enacting the Disaster Risk Management and Climate Change Act 2019, developing the climate change policy, establishing the Kiribati National Expert Group to oversee the implementation of the Kiribati Joint Implementation Plan or the National Adaptation Plan, and establishing the Island Disaster Committee in Islands Council. The political and policy interventions outlined above uphold an option which is the right to stay. But it's more important, what is more critical is the right to stay in healthy, safe, and clean environments. In this connection, Kiribati welcomed the recent adaptation of the United Nations General Assembly resolution on the mobilization and the International Court of Justice advisory option on climate change, and it states to honor the application under international law in responding to climate change and sea level rise. As I speak now, climate change is already affecting our coastal lines, freshwater resources, food systems, infrastructure, livelihoods, and communities. Sea level rise continue to threaten our islands, sustainable development, and well-being of our people and future generations. Kiribati congratulates with deep appreciation the forum organizers for this platform to enable discuss on these critical issues, such as inclusive climate mobility principles and actionable roadmap translating the climate mobility principles into agenda for action and implementation partnership by 2027, to name a few. In this regard, Kiribati fully supports these initiatives to ensure that our people are recognized and compensated on their loss and damage from climate change and sea level rise. We need to work in solidarity as brothers and sisters in this planet. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and also for the long way you came to join us today. We really appreciate. It's my honor to introduce the next speaker, His Excellency Diaz Faisal Malik Hendro-Priyono, hoping I pronounced it well, the Vice Minister of Environment of Indonesia. Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you for pronouncing it right. It's a mouthful. It's a very long last name, I know.
Might have the longest last name in the room here. But good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to join this discussion. I would like to thank Global Center for Climate Mobility and Robert Bosch Stiftung for hosting us and for bringing much needed attention to the growing challenge of climate mobility. For Indonesia, climate mobility is not a future concern. It is already a reality. As the world's largest archipelagic nation, we face a wide range of climate risk, including floods, landslides, droughts, and sea level rise. We saw this starkly in November 2025 when devastating flash floods and landslides in northern Sumatra displaced more than 1 million people. Our experience is clear. Climate mobility begins with resilience. And the best way to reduce forced displacement is to strengthen communities before crises occur. That is why Indonesia has invested in the Climate Community Program, or PROCLIM, locally known as PROCLIM, which enables local communities to identify risk, develop solutions, and lead adaptation efforts based on their own needs and knowledge. This program has reached more than 12,600 locations, 40% of which are located in the eastern part of Indonesia, including Maluku and Papua. We see this exact resilience on our easternmost island frontier, such as the Proclim village, Saporken on Papua Island. Facing overexploitation, this community has established protected community forests and developed sustainable ecotourism, securing their own right to remain. We have also seen how ecosystem restoration supports communities to remain where they belong. And through our mangrove conservation village program in 220 areas, communities are restoring coastal ecosystems while strengthening livelihoods. Another example is Golosepang village in East Nusa Tenggara, where mangrove restoration has helped revive local fisheries and create new economic opportunities. This is an adaptation that protects both people and dignity. Indonesia's experience shows that effective responses to climate mobility must be people-centered, locally driven, and supported by strong partnerships across government, communities, civil society, and of course the private sector. While our aggregate national data reflects a large territory, Indonesia is a collection of over 17,000 islands. On the ground, our frontline communities face similar challenges of sea level rise, extreme weather, saltwater intrusion, and shoreline erosion as other countries, including small island developing states. Therefore, we must recognize the particular circumstances of archipelagic, coastal, and small island nations, and we encourage international financial mechanisms to reflect the shared structural vulnerabilities of all island ecosystems. We must continue strengthening support for vulnerable countries through accessible climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. The effective implementation of the new collective quantified goal will be critical to ensuring that adequate, predictable, and accessible finance reaches vulnerable and local communities. And when movement becomes unavoidable, global strategies must be carefully balanced with local capacities. Indonesia is actively managing the impacts of this crisis, with up to 60% of our population living in coastal areas and more than 1,500 of our small islands projected to be submerged by 2050, and 115 more medium-sized islands by 2100. as well as our major coastal cities experiencing land subsidence, our national carrying capacity is already heavily engaged. Our efforts, therefore, to seek to ensure that adaptation and mobility solutions safeguard both human dignity and social cohesion of our people. Climate mobility is ultimately about people, their homes, livelihoods, cultures, and futures. Our shared responsibility is to ensure that no community is left without options, protection, or hope. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. I now have the honor to introduce the last speaker for this panel, His Excellency Mohamed Shatur Badawi, who is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Head of Mission at the EU in Brussels, and also, I understand, covering Germany for the Union of the Comoros. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Je vois que je serai le seul à parler français et je vais vous demander de mettre vos écouteurs et écouter l'excellente interprétation de nos interprètes que je vous demanderai de les applaudir par rapport à leur travail qu'ils font. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, distingués ministres, honorables délégués, chers partenaires, je voudrais tout d'abord remercier les organisateurs de ce forum de Berlin sur la mobilité climatique pour cette initiative qui place au cœur du débat international une réalité qui touche déjà des millions de personnes à travers le monde. Permettez-moi également, Monsieur le Président, en ce moment solennel, de transmettre les salutations fraternelles du Président de l'Union des Comores, Son Excellence Azali Assoumani. Le Président avait exprimé le souhait sincère d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui, aux côtés de l'ensemble des dirigeants présents à ce forum. Cependant, les impératifs de l'agenda national liés à des priorités institutionnelles majeures ne lui ont pas permis de se joindre à nous. À cette occasion, j'ai l'honneur de transmettre en son nom l'endossement formel par l'Union des Comores des principes relatifs à la mobilité climatique, un cadre que nous saluons comme une étape essentielle pour garantir la sécurité, la dignité et la capacité d'action des communautés touchées partout dans le monde. Excellences, pour les petits États insulaires en développement dont l'Union des Comores, le changement climatique n'est pas une menace lointaine. C'est une réalité. C'est une réalité quotidienne qui affecte nos populations, nos infrastructures, nos ressources naturelles et notre développement économique. Notre pays vit déjà les effets les plus sévères du dérèglement climatique. L'exemple le plus marquant demeure le passage du cyclone Kenneth en avril 2019, l'un des plus puissants jamais enregistrés dans notre pays. Le cyclone a détruit des milliers d'habitations, affecté près de la moitié de la population, ravagé les cultures vivrières, provoqué des déplacements des familles et mis en lumière la vulnérabilité extrême de notre État insulaire. Depuis le cyclone Kenneth, notre pays fait face à une fréquence croissante de phénomènes climatiques extrêmes, notamment durant la saison pluvieuse. Les inondations récurrentes, les vents violents
et l'érosion des sols entraîne des impacts considérables sur les infrastructures, les moyens de subsistance et l'environnement, dont certains sont irréversibles. Dans l'île d'Anjouan, les glissements de terrain se multiplient, détruisant des habitations, coupant des axes routiers essentiels et contraignant de nombreuses familles à se déplacer. Dans plusieurs villes et villages côtiers, la montée du niveau de la mer progresse inexorablement, fragilisant les infrastructures et menaçant les moyens de subsistance des populations. Des communautés entières vivent désormais dans l'incertitude, certains étant contraints à des déplacements temporaires, voire permanents. Pour les Comores, la mobilité climatique n'est pas une anticipation. C'est une réalité quotidienne qui touche nos familles, nos terres, notre économie et notre souveraineté. Face à cette situation, nous affirmons un principe fondamental. Chaque être humain doit pouvoir vivre dignement et en sécurité sur sa terre. La mobilité climatique ne doit pas être considérée uniquement comme une question migratoire, mais comme un enjeu de développement, d'adaptation et de justice climatique. Face à ces défis, le gouvernement de l'Union des Comores s'est mobilisé depuis le passage du cyclone Kenneth, ainsi qu'à la suite des inondations et des glissements de terrain récurrents observés chaque saison de pluie. Un plan national a été mis en œuvre afin de reconstruire les infrastructures endommagées, de soutenir les populations affectées et de renforcer la résilience des pays face aux risques climatiques. Plusieurs actions concrètes ont ainsi été engagées, notamment des programmes de reboisement, des projets de résilience agricole visant à sécuriser la production alimentaire, ainsi que des initiatives de reconstruction et de réhabilitation des habitations détruites au profit des familles touchées par le cyclone Kenneth. Ces efforts traduisent la volonté du gouvernement de protéger la population et de promouvoir un développement plus résilient face aux effets du changement climatique. Ces efforts témoignent de la détermination du gouvernement, mais ils montrent aussi les limites de nos capacités nationales face à l'ampleur des défis. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, les petits États insulaires en développement dont les Comores font partie subissent de plein fouet les effets du changement climatique. Bien qu'ils contribuent très peu aux émissions mondiales de gaz à effet de serre, leur population se voit souvent contrainte à la mobilité face à la montée des eaux, aux phénomènes météorologiques et à la dégradation progressive de leurs conditions de vie. Au regard de ce qui précède et compte tenu des contributions différentes des intervenants, mon pays, l'Union des Comores, lance un appel solennel en faveur d'un accès simplifié, accéléré, équitable au financement climatique afin de permettre aux pays les plus vulnérables de renforcer leur résilience et de faire face efficacement aux défis posés par le changement climatique. Mesdames et Messieurs, ce forum de Berlin constitue une occasion importante de transformer nos engagements en action et de construire ensemble une réponse mondiale à la hauteur des défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés. Pour finir, l'Union des Comores réaffirme son engagement à contribuer activement à la dynamique mondiale sur la mobilité climatique. Son Excellence, le président Azali Assoumani, bien que retenu au pays, suit avec une grande attention les travaux de ce forum et réitère la disponibilité des Comores à travailler avec tous les États et partenaires présents ici à Berlin. Nous appelons la communauté internationale à agir avec détermination, équité et humanité car c'est l'ensemble que nous pourrons transformer cette crise en une opportunité de coopération, de justice et de paix. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I know we're a bit behind on schedule, so we will move on to the next session. But before we do so, I would like to invite you to join me in a big round of applause for all our panelists as they leave the stage for the next session. Thank you very much.